Hi guys, welcome to another episode of I don't know what's going on really, but as I say, based on the last one we did with Lee Glasgow, one of the things that I do at the end is Lee Glasgow's written a question for the next person. It just happens to be Terry, and at the end of that, Terry will read the question, he'll answer it, and then he will then write a question for the next person. He doesn't know who it is. Lee didn't really know who it is, but I think it's quite obvious it was Terry in this instance. So we'll see what the question's like when we get to the end. This is in Terry Irwin. Terry and I met on a workshop, I think.
About 5 years ago.
About 5 years ago. And we speak on and off every now and again. And we have meetups like we are in Glencoe at the moment. And we all meet up and have a few drinks and take photographs, etc. But my interest in this at the moment, and the reason we're sitting here today, is due to retirement. And Terry's retired. And that's one of the reasons I asked Terry to talk. But also, he's got quite an interest in old profession. So I sort of thought I'd bring that into it as well. So my first question, Terry, is what did you do for a living before you retired?
Well, yeah, sometimes I tell people I repair waste disposal systems. I was a surgeon and I had an interest in colorectal surgery, so bowel surgery, mostly bowel cancer and colitis, that kind of thing.
That was a full-time career?
Full-time job, yeah, full-time.
How many years?
Job. Oh gosh, I qualified in 1978, so so 42 years I worked in the health service.
Great, and that's Northern Ireland?
Yeah.
What hospital was that?
Oh, I'm like the Marco Polo of Northern Ireland surgeons. So I started in Newry, which is a little small district general hospital, spent a couple of years there as a consultant, then moved to the Belfast City Hospital. And then we went through a series of reorganisations, so I spent most of my time in the Royal Victoria Hospital.
Okay. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I loved it. It's a great career. It's tough now. You know, it's a different job now from how it was when I first started. Yeah. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my career.
Did you have any hobbies and pastimes outside work at the time, or were you just too busy?
That's the problem with surgeons, that you tend to be pretty unpredictable in your hours. It's hard to get time off. At least in those days, it was a lot harder to get time off. Mm-hmm. So you know, I wasn't a golfer. Gardening, looking after kids, and a little bit of photography. Not very much in the early days, but yeah, mostly it was going to see a bit of rugby and taking the occasional photograph and keeping the garden in check.
What sort of plans did you make for retirement, or what sort of plans did you make for retirement?
So I spent a long time thinking about retirement. I started when I was about my early 50s, and I had a plan that kind of took me through from, I'd hoped from 58 onwards, but in fact turned out from 60 onwards. So I decided at 60 I didn't want to be getting up in the middle of the night or going in weekends. So I came off the night rota, the emergency rota, because we were on call for general surgery and trauma. And I cut down the work that I was doing and stopped doing major surgery at that stage. And then gradually over the next 4 or 5 years, I reduced to 2 days a week. Okay. And I dropped the surgery and just did endoscopy. So I was doing bowel cancer screening, which I really enjoyed.
Sort of answered my next question, which was, did you just retire or did you drop down to a few days?
No, I like a lot of people, I was quite scared of the idea of retirement, probably wrongly so. But I thought by scaling it back gradually, I could work myself into it, and I got to the point where I felt it was time to go. And I think that's quite important, that you don't just suddenly stop and have this void in your life.
What sort of I sort of understand that. I used to joke with people that I wanted to semi-retire then retire on a financial reason, really. And so I thought to myself, if I can do X amount of years doing less, earning enough money to get me to point B, which is, I always wanted to retire at roughly 55, 60. And so at 55, I wanted to do the semi-retirement thing, and at 60 completely finish. And of course, along came my stroke and finished that, which ruined the financial outlay. But then once something happens and you have to do it, you suddenly have a different thing. But I was a bit the same as you. I was actually scared to stop because I didn't know what that meant. So what main plans do you now have for your retirement?
I suppose the change is so profound from working to retirement, and what I've learned is don't make plans. Just take every day as it comes. Almost now, obviously there's some things you have to plan in advance, like coming on this trip. But if the weather's good, I'll go out to the garden. If the weather's bad, I'll sit and do some work in the study. We've 5 grandchildren now, so we spend a lot of time with the grandchildren. So I don't really plan anything. My wife would complain that I don't plan enough. So Jenny has commitments, and she's up and down the road to her mum and looking after grandchildren a lot, and I kind of fit in.
Do you think that's because your job was so organised before? You don't want to plan because you like the freedom of it.
Yeah, I mean, I knew where I would be every single hour of every single day, and it's really nice to have the freedom now. Just if the weather's good, just go and do something. It's
that's
great.
very interesting, because I said to because we have a year planner on the wall, and which I used to for my business before, and I used to write down everything so that Jane would know where I was, what part of the country I was in, everything else. So we still have it now, and then we sort of take it in turns. We're going to spend this week here and this week there, and it all just goes in. And then Jane has a babysitting commitment as well, so she travels from the country. So if it's not on the year planner, it doesn't exist. So it is quite structured and organised, but I sort of understand that of how, because one of the big problems at the moment is we have just spent in the Lake District, for instance, on the windiest 2 weeks that you could imagine. And I thought to myself, why have we done this? Why don't we just wait until the weather is nice and go? And I think obviously at the moment Jane's doing 2 days, and she's not fully retired yet. But I said to her, next year we should just wait and see what the weather's like before we commit. And so
of course, it depends where you're going. If you've booked accommodation, you booked a campsite or something, it's different. I do have one absolutely rigid commitment. That's Ulster Rugby.
Oh right.
And
Except you're here.
I'm here. Yes, I missed them beating Leinster for the second time, home and away this season.
Was your retirement a shock to the system after working all your life?
Not a shock, no, but the one thing that I missed right from the get-go was the camaraderie, the colleagues. I was a really great bunch of colleagues that I worked with over the years. Yeah. And I missed the social side of work, and there was quite an active social side of work, of coffee together and chats in the office together, and indeed doing cases together, and I did miss that.
It is. I think because of the way it happened to me, it was a bit of a shock to my system that suddenly I was like spending hundreds of hours promoting my business and then travelling all over the country and everything, working and being with people and being out on photo walks and being in groups of people all the time. Suddenly it's all finished at home, nothing to do, and obviously for a period of time I wasn't allowed to do anything. So that was a huge shock to me, and I thought, well, some people that actually retire like that, finish, that must completely be a complete shock. And I think the other thing as well is, usually you're at work and you're with people, and then suddenly you're not, you're at home. Yeah.
And of course for me, I retired 2 years ago now, finally, when I was 64, and it was just at the start of the first lockdown.
Right.
So we couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't really do anything for quite a long time. Luckily, that was a really good summer, and the garden was as good as it's ever looked.
What plans have you, what advice would you give to someone else that was planning to retire?
Exactly that, plan to retire. So don't suddenly find yourself at a retirement age and have to stop. Think about what you want to do in advance. Think about whether you want that gradual sort of soft landing into retirement, which is how I like to think of it. But also think what you're going to do in retirement. What hobbies have you got? What hobbies might you like to get? How are you going to fill your day? And I think that's really important. My father retired at 65 with almost no hobbies. And I saw how bored he was in that first 6 months or a year.
It's quite interesting because I know someone that's 70 odd now and they're not retired. And one of the questions I asked them a little while ago is, why not? And it was, well, I never really thought about it and I never planned to. And I don't know what to do if I did. And that's exactly what you said there, but in a different way around. He just doesn't know he can stop, I don't think. I don't think he ever planned to do it. And he doesn't need to carry on working, but he's got no hobbies, plans to do anything else. So I think work's the thing that keeps him going, you know what I mean? Yeah. So is there anything you'd have done differently planning your own retirement?
Not really. I mean, I'd like to have stopped the on-call a lot earlier. I think 60, to be getting out of bed in the middle of the night at 60 and called in is hard going. And we would be on call once a week, one night a week. So it was pretty busy. And I think that people in that situation would probably stay on longer. So we see the problem with retention of doctors in the health service. I actually think that if the last 10 years where it made it easier, people would stay on an awful lot longer than they do, and we wouldn't have such a problem. There are other complexities to it as well, but that's part of the problem. It's a pretty difficult place to retire from in a gradual way. I was lucky, but lots of people just can't do what I did.
The interesting one, this is the one that I've started on this, but I hope to bring in what I did with Lee yesterday, and that is, can you recommend any books that you found inspiration from?
Well, yeah, I knew this question was coming, so I've brought 3 with me.
Good.
and
I'll put all these below afterwards.
So strangely, I thought of these 3 books, and subsequent to me thinking about them, they became quite topical. So just before we came away, they discovered the Endurance, Shackleton's ship.
Oh yeah.
And this is the official book, I guess, the Lansing book on Shackleton's voyage, and it's an extraordinary fellow Irishman, of course.
Right.
And it is the most extraordinary story of leadership and endurance and courage, and the book is brilliantly written, and I would encourage anybody who hasn't read that book to seek it out. So Endurance.
Good, great.
Second one, I thought I'd better have something slightly more lighthearted, and I thought of this book just about the time when things unfortunately unfolded in Ukraine.
Okay.
So this is a very light-hearted book called Short History of Tractors in Ukrainian, which actually has quite a story running through it about the endurance of the Ukrainian spirit. And people who see this will think, what a strange book, but this is a hilarious book. It's beautifully written, and I would thoroughly recommend it.
Good, great.
But I thought if I had to come down to one, it would be this, which is from a chap called Atul Gawande, who's an American doctor, and it's called Being Mortal. And Atul Gawande is one of the people who has driven the safety agenda in the health service, and introduced things like, well, not solely him, but helped to introduce things like checklists, the same way that you have in the aircraft industry. But this is a rather different book, and this is about the end of your life.
Okay.
And it's about how we think about, we all want to have a good life, but this book is about how to think about a good death. And I'm not trying to send you a message here, Matt, but I bought you this.
Oh, great.
Because I think it's a really interesting read, and I would encourage people to think about this. If you've got elderly relatives,
Yeah.
there's some really clear messages about this. And I suppose working as a surgeon, we would often see people who wanted to put their elderly relatives through kind of miraculous, heroic surgery or heroic chemotherapy or whatever type of treatment, when it was quite clear that that really wasn't in the best interests of that particular patient. And I think this book discusses
This is
that
quite
very
interesting.
well.
This is going to be quite interesting to me. So, unbeknown to yourself, a lot younger on, I was always terrified of dying. And I was thinking, I'm having a good life and I want a really good long life, and I don't want to die because I want to live forever. I think a lot of people do. Obviously, you know you're going to, but at that time I couldn't even think about it. I used to have bad dreams about it. Being dyslexic as well, it used to get in my head and used to drive me insane. So I just want to go to sleep. I don't want to think about dying every night. And then I said to one of my father's dead now, but his brother, he said to me, he goes, "You haven't got to worry about that." And I said, "Why is that?" He goes, "Once you reach the age that you probably will reach before you die, your body's going to ache and be in so much pain anyway. You just wish you did." And I never really, I took that on as I thought, that's a really good and interesting thought. And then through having a few pains in life, like back pain, you think, God, imagine this being a lot worse than it is. But before my surgery, after my stroke, I've had a couple of little surgeries before, and obviously everyone warns you about what can happen and everything else, and they also at the same time telling you what can happen, they're telling you you'll be fine. Yeah. So someone's telling you this is the worst case scenario, and everyone else is walking up, you'll be fine, nothing will go wrong. But because of the carotid endarterectomy, I thought to myself that someone's warning me that you can have another stroke, this can happen, that can happen. I think, well, maybe it will. So it's the actual first time in my life when I was confronted with thinking, well, this could be it, you know. And it's the first time I went home, I thought about it. Jane come in and I told her what's going to happen, and she come in and she went upstairs to get changed from work, and she was upstairs, and I could hear her upstairs saying, he'll be fine, he'll be fine, he'll be fine. And I'm thinking, shit, will I? Won't I? I don't know. I wasn't scared, But what I did is I went and made my will, made sure my will was correct. I went and basically got my house in order. And I sat down before I went to sleep the night before the operation. I thought, well, I've had a good life. And I've probably done everything I want to do now. And I thought, so if it is it, it's it. And I
think it's good that you can think that way.
So this is going to be interesting.
Well, I think a lot of people, they don't understand how the medicalisation of death, which is what this book is about, how it can be bad for you rather than good for you. So I would often have said to patients who were very frail or particularly their relatives who wanted them to have something done that we thought was really just a step too far. I'm not religious at all, but if there is purgatory, it's being in intensive care, stuck on a ventilator for months at a time. And not only is that awful for the poor patient who may or may not be aware of what's going on, but life stops for their relatives as well. And people often forget that the relatives go up and sit day after day after day in intensive care, not knowing what's going to happen. So I think we should all think during a period of illness, what do we want done if things don't go the way that you hope they're going to go, and especially as we get older. And I think people should have that conversation with their family. I think that's really important, because what you don't want is a group of family members sitting with an elderly parent in hospital disagreeing about what they think their elderly relative might want. So tell people what do you want heroic measures taken? Do you want to get every single thing medicine can throw at you thrown at you? Because I don't. And it's interesting that doctors as a group get much less chemotherapy than their patients.
Well, do you know, that's a funny, interesting story, because there was a lady who lives up the road from me, and her husband died of cancer, and she had bowel cancer. And I don't know the intricacies of it all anyway, but so she refused to have any treatment at all, really, I think. And I was cleaning my van outside the house one day, and this was quite a long time, probably 8-9 years ago. I was cleaning the van outside the house, and she was telling my next door neighbour on the doorstep, she said, well, I've got bowel cancer. She said, I've lived a good life.
Yeah.
And I'm standing there like tears running down my face listening to this story. She goes, I've had a good life. I could go anytime. I could go tomorrow. She goes, but I've had a good life. It's been fine. And I'm fine. And I have good days and bad days. And I'll go to the shop. She goes, but I'm not having any more treatment. She only died last year.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself...
And she might have gone through months and months of horrible
treatment.
And everybody would be congratulating themselves on how well she'd done with the treatment. But in fact, her life was miserable.
Yeah.
Now, my oncology colleagues wouldn't always agree with that view. I mean, they do say the reason they screw down the lid on the coffin is to stop the oncologist giving another dose of chemotherapy. Sorry, guys, if anybody's watching. So I think, I'm not being nihilistic by the end of life. I think a lot of older patients would have said to me, I've lived long enough. And I think that when you get to that point, tell your family, I guess, is the message. And that comes out very strongly in the book.
My father had dementia, for vascular dementia, and he had dementia actually longer than I knew. So because my sister lived with my parents at the time, and I travelled up and down from Liverpool at the time back to Kent to see them, and they came up once to Liverpool, and he fell over getting off the bus, and I said to my mum, is he okay, this, that and the other, and he was, I would say I thought he was okay at that time. And then it was a couple of months later, the reason he had a fall was another problem, and I went down to visit them, and I thought, he's not right, and he doesn't have a clue who I am. And anyway, he ended up in hospital just after this fall, and I went in there, and one of the nurses was in there, and she's very Filipino lady, I think she was, very, very knowledgeable, very, very clever, and she obviously brilliant with names. So when he died, a couple of days before he died, funnily enough, I went back down to the hospital to see him because I was told he's dying. So went down there, and the same nurse was in there. This is like 5 years apart, and she said, hello, Matthew, and I thought, how can you do that? That is pretty good. She goes, well, I remember you when you came in to see Keith, and I said, do you really? I said, can I ask you a question? She said, didn't you know who I was then? And she said, no, he didn't have a clue who you were then. It was the first honest truth I'd got anyway. So I'd gone rushing to see him from Liverpool all the way down to Kent, where I was told he wasn't going to make it. And he had already had Do Not Resuscitate and everything on him. I got there and they'd fitted pacemaking wires.
Oh no.
And I thought, he's not going to want this.
Yeah.
And the weirdest thing is I then drove back to Liverpool and he pulled the pacemaking wires out in the night. Now, whether he knew what he was doing or not, I don't know. But I thought, he didn't want it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you learn a lot, don't you, from mortality of your own relatives, and obviously you do from that. But so I'm really looking forward to that. So thanks for that.
We better talk about something more cheery.
Yeah. No, it's good because it's something. It's actually something that in doing an interview with you and then Lee, it's something I want to explore that's different on YouTube. And everyone goes through all the fluffy, flowery stuff. And I think retirement, mortality, and things. I think it's something that does need to be spoken about because you don't know. I mean, when I talk about a stroke all the time, but when it happens to you, it's a shock to the system, and you think you're immortal, and you think nothing's ever going to happen to you, and suddenly it has.
Yeah.
But you never planned for that. Even around retirement, I never planned. I planned for retirement. I didn't plan for the fact I'd have a medical situation before that changes everything. And I think people need to look at that and think about that, and like you say, plan for what you're going to say to a surgeon and what you're going to say to your family.
Yeah, but don't obsess about it. And,
No.
you know, I don't think people should take the message that this has got to be constantly in their mind.
Yeah.
But they really should have that conversation with their family members.
I won't be assessing about it. I've got lots of mountains to climb. As I say, I've stolen this from Diary of a CEO, and I thought it was a really good idea. So what I do is I'll get you to, after you've read this, I'll get you to write a question for the next person I have on an interview, and I don't know who that'll be yet. But Lee Glasgow's written a question for you. If you could just read that out and then just answer the question, and then once you've done that, if you can write a question for the next person, that'd be great.
Well, I'm glad Lee has written something that A, is legible, and secondly, that is reasonably sensible, which is, those of us who know Lee find that's quite astonishing. So his question is, what hobby have you fancy doing? What would you do to fill some time? As I've said already, I've got a number of different hobbies already, a bit of photography, a bit of gardening, but I'm also in the middle of writing a book. But it's a nerdy sort of book. It's a book about how to do PowerPoint for doctors. But what I would really like to do is write a novel. I don't actually think I'm good enough to write a novel, so I'm not sure that it would get anywhere, but the process of sitting down and writing is something that I quite enjoy, so I fancy that, giving it a go.
I think you should. And the funny thing is, we had this conversation the other night in the bar. So people have often said, I should write my life story. And I've always thought, no, I can't do it. And I think to myself, well, you write on social media, you write your blog, you do videos and this, that and the other. But I couldn't sit down and write, and I don't know how to do it. So the only way to do it, I think, is probably go on a course to learn how to structure and write down. And a friend of mine, Jackie, I don't know whether you know her, she's been on a couple of the events we've done. Well, she's had cancer for quite a long time, on and off. And she's always said, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write all about it, the people that helped me. And she goes, I'm putting you in my book and this, that and the other. Well, the other day on Instagram, I noticed that she's actually done that. She's written the book and she's put me in it. And I said to her, I should write my book, shouldn't I? And she said, yeah, just start writing things down because they'll all become useful.
Yeah, I suppose the challenge writing a technical book, which is what I'm doing at the minute, is relatively straightforward because you don't have to have great command of the English language. But I think there is a great skill in using words to write a novel. So I think I would read your life story. I think it would be very interesting. Look, I know bits and pieces of it. Some of it scares me.
Yeah, it gets worse. And that's the other thing. Some of it's possibly not exactly legal. And some of it I don't know whether I want to put my name to it. But then if I wrote it as a third person, then it's not relevant.
No, it's not as interesting. No,
It's
you
not
need
as
to write it
interesting.
as a first person.
And I think, why not? So, and if you could just write a question for the next person, you don't know who they are, I don't know who they are, something that might be interesting, that would be great.
Great.
And thank you.
No, it's been a pleasure. What's today's date?
15th.